Well, good afternoon. Welcome back to the LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance Summit. We are so glad to have you here. You are in for a treat, let me tell you, with our keynote speaker, Rhodes Perry, and he's coming up in just a few minutes. But before we jump into the keynote speaker, I wanted to share just a little bit of information, especially for those that may not have been able to join us this morning. And speaking of this morning, I do want to thank our amazing panelists and moderators. We had some incredible conversation this morning, and we've got a great panel later this afternoon to finish up the summit today. But with that, I do want to recognize my incredible colleagues that do great work across the state. We work in collaboration, as you all know now, under the Texas LGBTQ Chambers of Commerce, and we do work together throughout the year, including now the LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance program. But we've been working through advocacy, our Pride in Business networking, our Pride Across Texas networking, and also our LGBTVE roundtable, where we support our amazing certified businesses across the state. So you can see our colleagues from each of the chambers, and I want to say to them, thank you for all that you do. You make me a better chamber leader. You make us a better chamber, and working with you has truly been one of the highlights and honors of my career. So we appreciate all you're doing. And speaking of the LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance, today we officially this morning launched the LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance program. This program is about connecting our corporate partners, leaders across our regions as our regional chambers and across the state to help, as you saw today, bringing leaders together this morning, bringing leaders together to share their insight and answering questions about maybe for those of you that are just getting started, your companies are just getting started on this LGBTQ plus inclusion journey, as we like to say at the chamber. That's the goal of this program, creating connection, giving you learning opportunities, helping to engage your leadership, your HR, your DEI folks. So we are going to be having much more. This will be an annual summit for us, but there'll be regional activities as well as, of course, there's going to be information coming out on more statewide activities. So keep an eye out for that. We hope you'll join us. If you are not a corporate partner of one of your regional market chambers, we encourage you to join, because that is the great way to get access to the LGBTQ plus Workplace Alliance programming that's specifically, again, developed and created to support our corporate partners. This is a way of giving back to our corporate partners who invest so much in us. So please become a sponsor. If you're not, get your employees engaged. Not to mention, I know I can speak for all four chambers. We have amazing events and activities throughout the year. It is a great way for your ERGs to engage. So with that, and without further ado, it is absolutely my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Now, I want to say before I introduce Rhodes, you are going to get his new book, Imagine Belonging. So that is going to be sent to you at the summit. You're going to get some amazing bonus materials that's coming your way. I know Lisa's been putting that in the chat, but you are going to see when you finish up in the next hour or so with this presentation why you're going to want to peel through that book and look through all these bonus materials, because Rhodes is truly a phenomenal LGBTQ leader, thought leader. He's recognized nationally across the country in the DEI space, and he has done some amazing work across the spectrum, even outside of LGBTQ plus inclusion, and he'll talk about that today. But I just wanted to share. You see his bio on the screen. I'm not going to read that word for word. What I want to tell you about Rhodes is the person that I met a number of years ago at the NGLCC conference, and the way Rhodes opened his arms up to me as someone working in the LGBTQ plus movement, and seeing his career grow, seeing his expertise that he shared with so many. This is his second book, by the way, book number 2. And you're going to see today why I think we are so lucky to have Rhodes join us today. And I thought, what better way to finish up this introduction with Rhodes? And so again, hopefully everybody can see this, his book, but I just wanted to share a couple of things that others said in the front of Rhodes's new book, Imagine Belonging. Rhodes draws from his own personal story and his significant professional experience to give a handbook for how to consciously create cultures of belonging. He helps us understand our need for inclusion and the pain of exclusion in a powerful way. What kind of leader do you want to be? Rhodes Perry artfully breaks down complicated layers of workplace dynamics and expectations to help you understand core DEI concepts and uncover old patterns. And last but not least, in these unprecedented times, we need direction and bold persons that are willing to give us guidance on how to create inclusive environments for people at work. That right there sums up the passion that Rhodes brings to this work, his purpose. It is my pleasure to turn it over to you, Rhodes. Thank you for being with us today. We are honored.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much, Tammy, and thank you for having me here at this really incredible event, a first of its kind. And I couldn't think of a better place to be right now. So I'd love to just kind of start things out by sharing a little bit about my earlier career. And earlier in my career, I worked at the White House and I did not feel safe. The job itself was an incredible opportunity. It was one where I was managing an $11 billion budget when I was all of 26. And I was really grateful for this job, yet emotionally exhausted and disconnected from my team. So you might be wondering what the static was. And it was pretty simple. When hanging out at the water cooler, exchanges like this would occur. A colleague would ask me, "Hey, Rhodes, what sports did you play in high school?" On the surface, that is a really innocent, benign question. It's one where we're trying to have connection with each other. And yet, for me to respond to that question, it was a complicated tightrope dance of some mental gymnastics and a sprinkle of historical censoring. So I'd stall at just to try to buy some time. Because in my heart, I wanted to say that I played women's fast pitch softball for 16 years, and I was pretty good, but to avoid confusion, saying I played baseball was much safer. Uh, I didn't want to lie. I'm a person with a lot of integrity, so I settled with disclosing that I ran cross country. And that was a safe response. It was a great pivot. It definitely got the attention off of me. And maybe for some of you at this point, you might be wondering why a guy like me was playing women's fast pitch softball for so many years. So for me, I am a transgender guy. And while my colleagues got my name and my pronouns right, even though I wasn't out, I felt unsafe and lacked a sense of trust to share more about who I am. So for anyone here who's unfamiliar with transgender men, I was assigned female at birth. I was socialized as a girl and young woman before I transitioned. And I really believe that my gender history offers a powerful perspective in life and absolutely the workplace. Yet going back to that water cooler exchange, that was a really tame example of more complicated self censorship that I had to do on a daily basis. There were so many stories that I wanted to share to build trust and rapport with my colleagues. Yet in 2006, I was pretty confident I was likely the first transgender person many on my team would encounter. And at that time, I didn't want to serve as an office educator. So I continued to censor my real self, something that was really precious about who I am. And ultimately, I failed at this job. I failed to trust my colleagues to share more about who I am. There's another truth to this, though, and that's that the White House failed me in not offering a sense of safety, namely job security. So at that time, there were no job protections for trans workers. And this communicated to me that bringing my real self to work could come with great risks. I could even lose my job. And so ultimately, I hid. And while I might be the first out trans person, some of you've had the chance to meet, though maybe not so much in this audience. I can guarantee I am not the first trans person that you've encountered. And today, I'm not going to be talking specifically about workplace issues. Instead, what we're going to do together is talk about a workplace epidemic of exclusion and othering, and how we as leaders here today can change this reality. But first, in order to settle into this big topic of belonging, I want you to reflect on a time where you may have felt a lack of safety and trust on the job. So this could have been a time that you felt that you needed to hide an important aspect of who you are. And you're doing this in order to fit in. So this kind of hiding, if you can relate to it, it's known as covering. It's protective. We cover what's most precious to us, what we're afraid will get hurt on the job in order to get ahead, to go along, to get along, and to fit in. But covering brings its own pain, brutally extracting the things that are most important to us, the things that make us the amazing people that we are. And we do it to say, yes, I measure up. Yes, I matter. Yes, I belong. So I first want to talk a little bit about what it means to belong and relate a story that a mentor, once had shared with me, three core questions that I wanted to that I would want to consider before applying to a job, and then later in my career before hiring my next great candidate. And those three questions are: can you do the job? Will you do the job? And do you belong? Do you fit in here? Do you fit in with the culture? And I just want to see if people are engaged with the chat, if any of you have used these three questions to consider your next great opportunity or before making a great hire. So just kind of like a yes, or just let me know if that's always okay. Yes, right. So we know these questions. These are really important questions. Okay, thank you, thank you. It's nice to know you all are out there. So so I find that these three questions are really essential, right? And even so, returning to that last question, do they fit in? Do they belong here? That for me was so much harder to answer working in organizations that fail to define their culture. And what I mean by that is it's an implicit culture. There's things that we learn once we're on the job, but to actually name what it is, it was very rare working in organizations where that was very, very clear. And I would ask you just to consider, is that clear to you as well? Is it easy for you to answer that question? Is it easy for you to explain in a couple of sentences what your culture is all about? Now, this is important to do because whether we know it or not, every time we move throughout our organization, we're auditing the culture. And what I mean by that is we're asking ourselves more often subconsciously, am I safe? And do I trust those around me? And that feeling might feel a particular way here. And maybe you're off to a Zoom meeting later today. Maybe you're meeting someone in person, right? You're going to be asking those questions again subconsciously. Am I safe? And do I trust those around me? And safety and trust, these are the building blocks to feeling this sense of belonging. If we answer yes to each of these questions, we're likely to feel a strong sense of belonging. And it's critical that we feel this at work. I think many of us know that belonging is really essential to our health and our well-being. And love and belonging comes right after making sure that we're physically safe. We have shelter, we have food and water. And it's a leading priority for businesses around the globe to think about their culture now and to try to build more belonging, more connection, more support, and feeling seen on the job. So to truly cultivate belonging, inclusive leaders like you and myself, we have to answer this question. Who are we intentionally including? And who might we be unintentionally excluding? So to answer this question, let's just do a quick visualization exercise. So if it's available to you, you might want to close your eyes. You might want to take a deep breath in and just exhale. Just kind of breathe normally and just imagine with me, what if your company clearly defined its culture, making it easy for you to define it as well, and centered it around safety, trust, and belonging? What would change for you? And maybe to answer that question, diving in a little bit more deeply, would you feel relief for not having to cover important aspects of who you are, hiding the things that are most precious to you? And if you could bring more of your real self into your leadership role, how would that impact those that you manage? And perhaps for those furthest away from your position of power, those least likely to feel safe just showing up to work, how might their experiences shift when they show up to work every day? So if your eyes are closed, you can come back into the space here with me. This kind of visualization, it pulls the curtain back upon a world where our workplaces have, or more painfully, have not created this sense of safety and trust. So 10 years ago, Amy Edmondson, she studied teams in hospital settings to find out if better performing teams made fewer mistakes. And initially, her research found the opposite. So on the surface, it appeared that better performing teams were making more mistakes. And that really threw her for a loop. So she wanted to take a deeper dive. She's a researcher, right? And she discovered a more profound story. What she found is that the more cohesive a team is, the more likely they were to report their mistakes or their failures. And by reporting those mistakes to their colleagues, they were more willing to discuss them and work through those failures. So that led to another question for her, and that was, what makes these kind of teams so cohesive? And what she found is that they have a strong sense of psychological safety. So this means that they felt accepted and respected to show up as their real selves without fear of negative consequences. So they're feeling accepted and respected without fear of negative consequences. And I think that's so key. And because of this strong sense of psychological safety, they trusted others with their ideas, taking those risks, those sometimes big risks. When you have a good idea and you're not sure how it's going to be received, they took those risks without fear. And this kind of risk taking often leads teams to fail faster. Now, sometimes when I introduce this strategy of failing faster, people get really nervous. And I think for those of us who run our own businesses, we know that failing faster is really a simple business strategy. It allows our teams to quickly and cheaply validate new ideas, products, and services before we make a big financial investment in them. So, quite simply, if you've not cultivated this strong sense of safety and trust on your team, failing faster is not going to be an option. And if failing faster isn't an option, innovation is going to be out of reach. So I have another question for you. And that is just this general question of, have you ever felt the pressure to conform at work? So many of us, we might know this feeling. It's like forcing ourselves into a box in order to fit in, right? And in hindsight, if you can relate to this feeling, was the pressure to conform a pathway to climb the career ladder? Was it that limited pathway where you could see your next move, up, but in order to do that, you would have to leave some of the things most precious to you behind? So if you're nodding or silently saying yes, what important part of yourself did you have to conceal or even leave behind in order to protect your career ambitions? Another way to put this is just, what was the cost to you? Okay, so you might learn throughout this talk I'm a nerd, and so George Orwell's novel 1984 sticks out to me. And that was when I first got introduced to this concept called groupthink. Now, this is a phenomenon in which individuals like you and myself, we overlook potential problems in pursuit of conformity. And the sad part of this is, no matter how independent we are, no matter how independent our spirit is, many of us, myself included at times, we suffer from this malady. So this is suffering from groupthink, where we fear challenging decisions that do not make sense, where we support group consensus over good judgment. And when we do this, this sacrifices our authentic selves and our agency just to be ourselves. These are our independent voices and ideas. And this kind of behavior can devastate our organization's success. Like COVID-19, a global pandemic, groupthink can spread silently and it can quickly infect our entire workplace. And this infection can terrorize us for our imperfections or our failures, our mistakes, right? Now, failing in business isn't bad. The companies that fail early and fail faster are that much closer to realizing their next innovative idea, their next great product, or even an industry breakthrough. So a good example of this, no matter what your opinions are here, is just a quick question, and this is a quick yes or no in the chat. How many of you all have heard of Z shops? So it's Z shops. I'm just looking. Okay, Thank you, Tony. I had never heard of Z shops before too. And when I was thinking, yeah, I see a question mark. Yeah. So Z shops, I was like, what is Z shops? And I learned what Z shops was when I was investigating what Jeff Bezos was doing before he started Amazon. So Z shops was a failed online auction site that helped Bezos create the blueprint for his mega business, Amazon, that many of us know today, right? And if you don't know what Amazon is, just let me know in the chat, and we can send you that way. Another good example of kind of fast failures that lead to industry breakthroughs is Arianna Huffington. So Arianna Huffington, if you don't know, she struggled to get people to read her work. Before starting her famous blog, which I think many of us know, the Huffington Post, her second book was rejected by 36 major publishers. And now every day she enjoys a readership of millions and millions of people. So it's pretty phenomenal, right? That sometimes when we're about to strike success, we receive our hardest, biggest failure or mistake. So examples like these fast failures before important business successes, they can go on, and I'm sure many of you can think of examples. And if there are any examples, I'd love to see what pops up for you in the chat. And here's the thing, the social pressure to conform, this is very real, and it's quite dangerous because these social pressures discourage us from taking those risks that may lead to failure before we have those industry breakthroughs. So another contemporary example, and this one might touch us more personally, is the 2008 banking industry collapse. The conventional thinking there at the time was that housing prices would continue to go up and up and up. And tragically, bankers didn't thoroughly go through and explore what would happen if housing prices began to fall. And that failure to challenge this status quo thinking, this group think, led to the meltdown of some of the biggest financial institutions that were at the time believed to be too big to fail. So what's important to recognize here, and something that at least I tend to forget, what sometimes my clients tend to forget, is that organizations, no matter how big they are simply groups of people. And these groups of people, even you and me, are susceptible to the consequences of groupthink. So if you're honest with yourselves, you'll begin to recognize that groupthink and the pressure to conform causes you, and it causes me and all of us here the pressure to cover, conceal, omit, or even hide our real selves. And this obscures our superpowers, our genius, and our talent. And all of that comes from our differences. So these differences will help you innovate and break out of groupthink and question the status quo. So we are all leaders here, and many of us are leading large groups of people who all want to show you what you want. And that's a form of positional power. And while it might be a nice stroke to our egos, this type of behavior is an incubator for people pleasing and groupthink, and that's the foundation of conformity. So the questions that beg to be answered here are, what will it take to move beyond this fear of failure? And this is a big one, because many of us are trying to break up with perfectionism, myself included. And another question is, how can leaders like us positively use our power and our influence? And then from there, how do we empower those that we're leading to feel safe enough to be real so we can get failure out of the way, we can normalize mistakes, and we can get closer to realizing our business successes? So another story for you, when I was a student at Notre Dame, I had a creative writing professor, and I really appreciate what she told me. She said, from the moment that you were born, you were gifted with creative potential. And the moment you begin to express it sparks the beginning of your ability to change the world. So I love that. And I also know that maybe some of us here might be kind of skeptical, and we might say, if we all have the ability to change the world, then why is there still so much suffering? And that's a really good question to ask. And what I want you to remember here is that it takes a great deal of courage to express your creativity. And when you're brave enough to let go of the outcomes that you desire, that's going to be the moment that you begin to build the world that you want to see. And the idea of expressing our creativity may sound like a woo-woo concept, And the idea of giving yourself permission to get creative at work, that might feel too risky or even out of reach. So I want to recognize that. And I also want to make a business translation for you. As a leader, no matter what your role is, you're charged with being a visionary. So you're managing the work that you have today while you're also boldly imagining where you can lead your team or your organization into the future. And while this may sound scary, if you trust the process and you move through the fear, you will then have the ability to explore whatever ideas arise. And that requires that psychological safety, being able to feel safe and to trust those around us. So to truly explore these foundations of building belonging, I'm gonna implore you to channel that childlike curiosity. And no matter kind of where we are in our life journey, we still have that childlike curiosity. It's when we examine, when we adventure, when we ask why, and we move into uncertainty without shame or reservation. And it's in these places that we can excavate our inclusive leadership skills. These are the skills we need right now. We're working to get equipped to respond to the moment that we're in today. Inclusive leadership skills can help us. And going back to what my professor shared, she reminded me that my creative expression can have an impact on the world. It can change it. It can transform it. And a great deal of courage is required to express that. And I share her wisdom with you and the impact that it had on me because it helps in recognizing what it means to be that inclusive leader, a person that has the ability to initiate and embrace change. That's the inclusive leadership blueprint. And this is a blueprint that many of us are seeking today. It empowers us to channel our younger selves and to get genuinely curious and to have courage. So when I go back and I think about that White House experience, the water cooler, and so many other experiences, I want to underscore that I wasn't encouraged to show up as my real self. I wasn't encouraged to have that curiosity or explore that childlike wonder. In fact, it was pretty clear to me that if I did, ascending the ranks of leadership wouldn't be an option there. I might have even lost my job. So later in my career, I worked for a national civil rights organization, and working for an employer that protected me at base level from discrimination, but more importantly, valued my professional and lived experiences. That was truly a privilege, and one that I know many of us, we've never felt that in the workplace, right? And for the first time for me in that moment, in that organization, I felt a strong sense of safety and trust on the job. I felt like I belonged. The people who built this culture earned the right to hear my story, and when I shared it, they received it with care. Now, I want to know if the following question rings true for you all. How many of you all feel this strong sense of belonging at work? So you feel that psychological safety and you trust those around you. And if you want to just type in a yes, I feel it, or maybe sometimes there, or no, maybe on a scale of 1 to 5. Yes, all right, Crystal. Yes, all right. See Melissa, Larry, thank you, Tony. Yes, okay. So you're feeling it, right? Marcella says not really. Tracy says sometimes. Josh says getting there, right? So this is an experience that varies. And usually when I share this talk with leaders, often on executive teams, a lot of the hands rise up, right? And a lot of that has to do with positional power, and a number of other dynamics that are happening on those leadership teams. So often when I ask those groups that have that strong sense of belonging, I ask them a follow-up question, which is, how many of you in the room or virtually believe that those furthest removed from your position of power, oftentimes frontline staff, how do they experience belonging? Do you believe that they also feel this strong sense of belonging? And oftentimes there's pause, and curiosity, right? And that leads to another conversation. Um, but what I find is when we actually conduct culture audits in different organizations, many folks have the response of sometimes getting there or not at all, right? And even for those of us in positions of power, um, experiencing this sense of belonging on a ongoing basis isn't a given. And that's because 75% of us, in some way, are limiting our full expression on the job. And many of us are doing this by consciously downplaying our vulnerabilities. We do this to fit in with the dominant culture of our organization. And this is the culture that's often built by those of us who are in leadership positions, leaders who feel that strong sense of belonging. And even so, for some of those leaders, some of the most enfranchised folks, and I'm looking at fellow white guys who might be here in this space, 45% of us are also covering on the job. So for some white guys, covering could include not talking about growing up poor, not sharing about an invisible disability, or like me, not sharing more about who you are, in terms of my gender identity, or who you love in terms of my sexual orientation. So covering creates barriers to innovation. It makes us feel excluded. And in order to grow into the leaders that we've been waiting for, we have to get curious about the worldview of those on our team who feel excluded in their work. So if we're going to be successful at building belonging, then we must center our efforts around those who are the least likely to feel safe on the job. Now, this also requires curiosity. And this kind of curiosity requires us to abandon the old notions of the golden rule. So this is the rule. I grew up with it. Maybe some of you grew up with it as well. It encourages us to treat others in a way in which we want to be treated. And that might be great because we know exactly how we want to be treated. But when it comes to welcoming people from different backgrounds or lived experiences, people with different perspectives from your own, we know that the golden rule does not cut it. It assumes that other people want to be treated in exactly the same way that you want to be treated. It implies that we're all alike, and it suggests that safety, trust, and belonging looks the same to me as it does to you. Now, fortunately, there is the platinum rule, and it encourages us to treat others in a way in which they want to be treated. When you apply the platinum rule, your actions demonstrate that you care enough about another colleague to learn about what they want, treating them as the independent person that they are. And you recognize that your colleagues' needs aren't about you. It's all about them. So we have to learn how to decenter ourselves to really show up for those on our team and those that we're leading. So I want you to take another deep breath in with me, because I know that might be big, right? It's a shift in thinking. And I want you to look within yourself right now and just check in, just a temperature check. How are you feeling? Are you able to acknowledge perhaps some of the fear or anxiety that sometimes arises when we're dreaming about these big workplace changes, sometimes big workplace transformations? Now, this type of fear, we might feel safe sharing with those in our inner circle, maybe family, maybe close friends, right? But chances are it feels a little more risky to share these kinds of fears within our professional network. Now, this can be a fear that whispers in our ear. Our company, we can't do this work. We can't build belonging. We can't focus on our culture. We don't have the money. We don't have the expertise to do it right. Another fear that might pop up for some of us is, are people, they're just not ready to embrace this type of change? Or this is another kind of common one. Our team just doesn't have the time right now. It's just not a priority. Now, I want to say something about this kind of fear. This kind of fear is not the fear of change, though it often appears to be. This fear actually comes from something much deeper. And this deeper fear is a deeper root, and that root is the fear of loss. So for myself, my background is in economics, and maybe some of you are also familiar with this term in kind of economics land, which is known as loss aversion. And I think loss aversion speaks really well to this kind of fear. So basically what loss aversion is, it occurs when people would rather avoid losing money than making more. The cognitive impact of losing something is thought to be 2 times as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something. So in the context of building belonging at work, in the context of building a healthier workplace culture, loss aversion arises when some of the most resistant leaders are fearful that in doing so, they will lose their power or their status. And here's what I want to say about that. And this might be popping up for you all in your workplaces, right? Loss aversion clouds these leaders' better judgment. They fail to recognize the three key benefits to building a belonging culture. The first is that their leadership legacy will be positively remembered. The second is that their company's bottom line will enjoy healthy profits. And the third is that workers will feel valued and stick around for the long haul, which is really important right now in the era of the Great Resignation. So how does loss aversion show up? A common scenario that clients often ask me is some version of this question. And it's often after doing a keynote or a workshop or some kind of consulting engagement. It's more of a quiet question. It's, Rhodes, what do I say to an employee who fears that they will lose their job if we advance our belonging commitments, if we advance our commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So this question comes up more often than not, and it's an important one for each of you to anticipate answering. And this question reminds me of another economics term, and this one is the good old zero-sum game. So a zero-sum game goes like this. It occurs when one person gains something and another person loses something in exactly the same amount. So this concept comes from the scarcity mindset, or the belief that we have unlimited human wants in a world with limited resources. So here's what I want you to remember about this. What if I told you that when it comes to building belonging at work, that it simply doesn't work that way? So when the leadership team has the will to advance its culture change commitments, its belonging commitments, its diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments, centering those least likely to feel safe on the job, everyone in the workplace wins. The research is clear. Teams become more cohesive. Failure is welcome to get closer to business innovations, and those innovations lead to business success. And that winning spirit comes from a growth mindset, or the belief that we all have enough. And that fosters a collaborative environment, giving people what they need so that they can do their best work. And that is equity in action on an interpersonal level, giving people what they need so that they can do their best work. When we embrace the growth mindset, we abandon engaging in toxic competition where we hoard profit, credit, and power. And leaders like you who embrace this growth mindset can allay concerns of those who struggle with loss aversion. So recently, I went through Seth Godin's Alt MBA. It's a pretty cool program. Maybe some of you have heard of it. In the program, we were challenged to write about a topic that we strongly support from the perspective of another person who disagrees with us and argue why they're right. And the goal of this exercise was to really understand how empathy truly works. It was at the core of this assignment, and it's at the core of what it takes to be an inclusive leader. So I like big challenges. So I wrote about a resistant business leader who doesn't want to prioritize building a healthier workplace culture. And in this exercise, I wrote about someone in my life. I wrote about my best friend's stepdad, Dennis. And Dennis is someone I have a positive relationship with. If he were here today, here is what he would likely say about building belonging at work. So I'm going to channel him. Hi, my name is Dennis, and I lead a small business that I started over 20 years ago. Recently, my son Dan encouraged me to hire a consultant to help us diversify our team. I'm not convinced that this is necessary, and I'm concerned about the time and the cost. Dan, however, is insistent that this work is paramount in order to remain relevant in our industry. While I'm not opposed to creating a more equal workplace, I do have an issue with giving people who haven't put in the hard work handouts. I mean, look at me. I grew up poor, worked my way through college, and when I couldn't find work, I got resourceful and I started my own business. No one gave me a handout, and I wouldn't accept one even if they did. At the end of the day, my company is a meritocracy. Respect the chain of command, maintain order, keep harmony with others, and you'll go far with us. To me, that's fair. Okay, so that was Dennis, and we can say goodbye to Dennis. And I have to say that doing this exercise was incredibly hard. It was really hard for me, but it aligns with my values of seeing the humanity in other people, even when I don't agree with their worldviews. So in order to succeed in building a healthier workplace culture, we have to learn how those that might be resistant to it at first think and what they believe. And we must be willing to move into their worlds and have what's known as sonder. So this was a newer concept to me a couple of years ago, and it might be new to you. Sonder is the realization that each random person you pass is living a life as vivid and as complex as your own. And Sonder reminds us that each person's world is filled with their own ambitions, friends, routines, fears, joys, beliefs, and behaviors. And this rich inner world is 100% invisible to us. So with a business leader like Dennis, I can't simply bear witness to his worldview and then get defensive and come up with a story, my own story about why he's terrible at business. In order to be successful, I need to flex my empathy muscles and practice Sonder. That's the realization that his worldview was shaped by the vivid and complex life that he leads. So Dennis did share his truth with us, and it's an important one to validate, his lived experiences, right? He did grow up poor, he did work his way through college, and he did experience job rejection when searching for work. He worked hard to build his company, and it meant everything to him. He remembers his own hard work and believes his merit alone allowed him to advance. Now, when I practice Sonder, I can escape this moral matrix of who's right and versus who is wrong, and really gain an appreciation for why Dennis is wired the way that he is. I certainly don't agree with his worldview. He also holds a tremendous amount of privilege that he's willfully overlooking. Yet if I'm successful in understanding his worldview, I can draw connections to his own story and share why building belonging is key to his company's future successes. Now, a few of you may be more aligned with Dennis's worldview. Some of you may agree with my own, and still others here might be on the fence. So no matter where you are, most of us fear failure when introducing big changes to our workplace. So for many of us, we're here today because logically we know building belonging at work leads to business success. Yet, what if we fail at delivering? So I grew up with the belief that there is nothing worse than failure. It's something I accepted as a kid, and as I started to think more critically, I realized I didn't have an answer as to why failure would be so bad. I simply knew it wasn't an option. So in reality, it's hard to picture coming back from failure. It's hard to picture being happy and successful after a big public failure. So when we see the need to take a big risk, the specter of failure arises, and that brings with it all sorts of rootless, formless terror. But what's the worst that can happen? Let's play that game for a moment. So we could use our social capital, we can champion building belonging, we could fail, lose respect in our company. That might happen. That might be the worst thing that could happen. So then what would happen next? Well, if we lost our social capital, we could miss out on opportunities to advance within our company, and that could happen. So then what? Well, then we might be compelled to leave our jobs for greener pastures, or even worse, we could get fired. And getting fired is pretty terrifying. And even if we lost our jobs, we would still be right here. So that begs for the question, then what? So to answer that question, I want to share a bit about Denise Young Smith. So Denise was once touted as Apple's newest voice and was recognized in 2017 as one of the most powerful Black women in corporate America. And after 20 years of ascending the ranks of Apple, she was appointed to serve as the company's first vice president of diversity and inclusion, reporting directly to CEO Tim Cook. 5 months, just 5 months into her new role, Denise spoke at a conference where she shared the following remarks to a question asking if Black women would be a priority for her at Apple. And here's what she said. I've been Black and a woman for a long time. I've been a first, I've been an only. And when I was at the Black Enterprise Women of Power Summit, there were numbers and numbers of Black women together, successful, astonishing Black women. And we were sharing stories, and every single one of us could share the same stories about being in a room, in a meeting, and someone would assume that you were the assistant, the secretary, that you were not the manager, you were not the boss, and that your staff person that was 3 levels below you was your boss. We all shared those stories. You ask me about my work at Apple, or in particular, who do I focus on? I focus on everyone. Diversity is the human experience. So in that same response, Denise went on to say that it was possible to have diversity among a dozen white men, well, given their different lived experiences and life perspectives. Despite a groundbreaking 20-year career at Apple, Denise stepped down shortly after making these remarks because they were taken out of context. Most reports claim that she said it was only possible to have diversity among a dozen white men in response to the question asking her if she would prioritize Black women at Apple. Even though Denise was speaking her truth and powerfully shared it, she was compelled to issue a public apology for the controversial choice of words that she used. In her statement, she said she regretted the words she used in making her point about the many factors that contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is a scary moment for leaders like us. When we're pressed to share our truth, to lean into being vulnerable, and to speak with emotional honesty, our words may in fact be taken out of context. So when we're trying to initiate change that stirs up the fear of loss aversion, our efforts will most likely be overly scrutinized. So the greatest barrier that we must overcome as inclusive leaders is successfully walking this imaginary high wire. This is a high wire, it's a balancing act of making bold change while neutralizing those that are resistant to this work. Neutralizing business leaders like Dennis, people that resist this change and believe that good company culture stems only from hard work and fitting in. So by now, I hope we know that fitting in has done quite a number on us, causing us to cover and limit our genius on the job. This balancing act, it's exhausting, and it comes at a great risk. Because if we fall, if we fail publicly, we may in fact lose what is most familiar to us, which is our jobs. So the walk on the high wire is what truly holds us back from speaking truth to power. It holds us back from doing the right thing when no one is looking, when everyone is looking, or when some are waiting for us to fall and fail. So to successfully walk across it, we have to recognize that we are the leaders that we've been waiting for. And we have what it takes to do what is right, because the time is right to do it. We have to suspend our desire for those quick wins, those things that look great for our next marketing campaign. And instead, we must embrace that tension of not knowing if we'll be successful and move forward despite those risks. So what will it take to move forward despite those risks? That's the big question that I'm sure you're asking right now. So to answer that question, I want to share about one other person in this talk who did just that. And this is when I was working as a senior advisor for New York City. And at that time, the region was facing a massive class action lawsuit for failing to deliver equitable services to LGBTQ youth and foster care. My charge there was to equip the nation's largest municipal child welfare agency. So this was upwards of 30,000 professionals with the knowledge, skills, and confidence to do better. And so for motivation, I placed this Michelangelo quote above my desk. I still have it over here. And that is, I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set them free. So much like that marble, my role was not easily understood by many people. Yet my vision was clear and my why was powerful. I knew that the lives and well-being of LGBTQ young people were at stake. So I challenged the status quo, even when I knew my leadership was expending scarce influence and social capital. As Dr. Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. And one of my superpowers was helping my colleagues know better. Many failed to understand those systems and tended to support the young people that we worked with were broken. And they were riddled with barriers that denied young people in our systems the ability to thrive into healthy and happy adults. Most recognized that many LGBTQ young people were in these systems due to family rejection, coupled with racism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia. And these were all baked inside the workplace culture. Yet far too many accepted that this kind of rejection was, in their words, just the way the world was. So fortunately, I worked for a commissioner. His name was Judge Ron Richter, and he believed that change was possible. Ron taught me what it meant to be an inclusive leader. He embraced these 6 core traits shared by every inclusive leader. The first one, and we've been talking about this a lot, he was curious, and he tackled each new challenge with a beginner's mindset. Why does the problem exist? What are the options to resolve it? And how can we collaborate together to overcome it? He was also cognizant of his biases. So as a white, affluent man, he did his homework to mitigate his biases. He hired a diverse leadership team, and that team held him accountable by highlighting his blind spots. He also led with cultural intelligence. So this means he built relationships across power differences. He listened to LGBTQ community members, and then he incorporated their guidance where he could. And one of the things I admired most about Ron is that he had the commitment to appropriately resource and staff this work. He had the courage to collaborate with some of his biggest critics. And in the end, he walked away with a legacy of leading with integrity, of doing what was right, no matter the risks, to make a difference that ultimately made all of us so much better. It allowed us to show up with more agency in the workplace. And Ron's legacy will be forever remembered because he tried to build a system that worked equitably, to give each person what they needed. So now, this is a big question for you. Do you want to have a leadership legacy like Ron's? And if so, what inclusive leadership traits do you already share with him? And those traits, again, are curiosity, cognizance of bias, cultural intelligence, commitment, courage, collaboration. And you can throw them in the chat. I mean, anyone that comes to mind, the one that is your superpower, how do you grow that? How do you grow the others? What inclusive leadership traits do you want to develop? The bottom line here is that this requires practice. And when you consistently practice these leadership traits, you begin building belonging for those that are least likely to feel safe on the job. So after today's keynote, you're going to be faced with a choice. You can either commit to building a healthier workplace culture and doing your part, no matter what your role is, or you could return to your routine and pretend that you learned nothing today. And there's a fair warning, if you choose that latter route, there are several hazards. Your team may likely suffer from covering the truly important parts of themselves that can build real connections. And this loss limits team cohesion and innovation. And for those furthest removed from your position, they're more likely to feel profoundly unsafe if we settle for the status quo. And here's the sad truth about status quo companies. They miss out on valuable opportunities to reach emerging markets. They fail to attract underrepresented and historically excluded talent. And worse, this talent will either choose to work at competitors or create their own businesses competing against status quo companies. Generationally, millennials, Zoomers, and future generations, they expect so much more from their employers. They hold high expectations, and they know that status quo companies are consistently failing to meet them. They crave working for employers that allow them to be seen and fully expressed. They want to know that they're valued for showing up for all that they bring to the work. And they know the truth. Status quo companies are not going to be relevant in the future. So the biggest question for you today, if you knew you couldn't fail at building a better workplace culture, what would you do right now to move your company into the future of work today? So here's where I'd like to end things. I'd like to end with an invitation, a thank you, and a ritual. So let's all take a moment just to sit in everything that we've just experienced and orient to what comes next. So this is a way to connect more deeply with our ability to lead inclusively, to empowering our people to show up as their real selves so they can do their best work. I am endlessly curious about how we can lead inclusively into an equitable future, a future that works better for those on our team who still find the idea of belonging out of reach, out of sight, and out of mind. And I want each of you to focus on the places where you can grow the possibilities of more safety, trust, and belonging for your team. And I want those who are the least likely to feel safe at work to have greater access to leadership, stretch opportunities and influence, and then for all of us to grow from these places responsibly. And that means for some of us, we have to take up more space. And for others of us, that means moving back and sharing some of our power so that we all might have enough. And truly, that is equity in action. Taking risks without having all of the answers and making the commitment to collaborate across power differences. Those are at the heart of what it takes to build a better workplace culture. Now, the old ways of acting as a leader that fits in have done quite a number on how we feel about our sense of belonging. We swing wildly between covering and hiding our talents and conforming as a way to prove our worthiness. And then we strive towards perfectionism, hoarding power, and accepting the scarcity mindset. We behave this way because of the workplace culture many of us have inherited. Yet dreaming of building belonging may feel both exciting and isolating. So here's what I know for true. Here's what I know is true. The different people, cultures, and ideas stitched throughout the fabric of your company are, at the end of the day, your most powerful assets. Your workplace does have the capacity to embrace all parts of these powerful differences. And those leaders that recognize this truth, you're going to have the competitive advantage of moving into the future of work. Together, we have the collective power of building a movement where all of our employees feel a strong sense of belonging. Now, you may have heard the phrase, you may have said it yourself. We have to describe it to do it. And during today's talk, I believe you all caught just a few glimpses of what could be possible if you choose to join this movement, this belonging movement, because we're all a part of something much larger, each and every one of us. And during our time together today, I think it's contributed to a truly meaningful experience. So if this message inspires you, if you're ready to join the belonging movement, then go out there and make it happen. And thank you so much for inviting me to be your speaker today. It was truly a pleasure.
Rhodes, wow. I mean, this is incredible. The words that keep coming up for me today are impactful, powerful. But the fact that you've given everyone that's joining us today tools, information that they can literally use. I love this concept of belonging, and I'm really a couple of questions I have. One is thinking about those inclusive leadership skills. Can you share where you've seen a leader? You said, we can grow into these.
Mhm.
Can you kind of share some examples you've seen a leader move from A to B, if you will?
Yeah, yeah, and I think in that example that I was talking about Ron, Judge Ron Richter, I think he was
Hmm.
a great role model of just showing very simply, right? I mean, there's 6 traits. I sometimes when I look at that visual, it's a little overwhelming. And I think that we do it. I think part of growing into these leadership traits, is the constant practice, and I think I'm just gonna go back to that example because it's probably fresh in all of our minds. He's still in the process of practicing. There's no perfection here. It's practice doesn't make perfect. It's practice makes more practice. And so I think if we recognize that there's no end destination, that this is a constant learning journey, and at the end of the day, it will help us be better at our jobs, right? It helps us build more trusting relationships. That at the end of the day is what makes a strong organization. And sometimes we forget it, right? Because sometimes we look at the technology and ways to do things faster or cheaper, and that's all important too. And the relationships will get there, will help make that more of a success, because it's the people that, until we become robots, which I hope never happens, that's what makes work fun too, is getting to know people who are different than us.
Absolutely. And with your work, I'm thinking about when we first met a number of years ago, many years, probably longer than we want to admit. Going back to that, to where this belonging movement is, the work that you're doing. What are the shifts that you're seeing? What are some takeaways that people listening today can really take back to their companies in terms of, uh, we love this concept. We love what you've said, but where do we get started? What does that look
Yes.
like?
Yeah, yeah, and I would imagine that probably for a good number of folks, there might be some culture work happening. You might have some diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. You may have done a training on unconscious bias. I think the very first place that I would encourage you to go is if you have access to the executive team or to your team leader, is being very clear on what is our vision? Like, what is the kind of culture that our team wants to have? Hopefully, like our organization wants to create, and what does that actually look like? What's the end goal that we're working towards? Because the number one reason why most of this work fails is not because the strategies aren't good and that it's proven to work, because
Mhm.
it does work with long-term commitment. It's the lack of a long-term vision of really naming
Mm.
what you want your culture to be and also knowing what you're up against. So I think like really taking a hard look into the mirror, doing those kind of culture assessments that are thorough, that are you're asking the questions where you're trying to get the data that you need to understand what is that experience right now, because we may know who we're intentionally including, who might we be unintentionally excluding, that's creating tensions in our workplace, that's undermining, the values that we have. So I'd say long-term vision, really take a look at your strategic goals broadly and see where this work fits into those strategic goals in your organization, and being clear on what your values are. And if you don't have value statements in the organization, I would maybe start there as a first step. Um, few few
Step
few little tips there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely step number one there. That's great advice. I'm going back to just hearing you talking about that vision, and I'm going back to a question that came up in one of our, specifically the ERG panel this morning. I'm curious as to your take with this frame around belonging, but the question was something like, how do we move an ERG to a BRG? And
Mm.
that BRG, we know, so much more intentional, connected to strategic goals. Can you talk about that a little bit in context of, the belonging and the work that you've been talking about today?
Yeah, yeah. I think when I work with clients who have like really sophisticated BRGs, their executive team, they may have like a DEI department, a CDO, chief diversity officer. It's really clear that there's been a lot of top level thinking of recognizing, wow, like we have a strategic plan. We want to build in elements of the kind of culture we want to build in that plan. And we need partners throughout the organization to guide us. And those BRGs are almost like real-time focus groups of different employees from different groups, social groups that can provide the experiences of whether it's Black employees, LGBTQ plus employees,
Hmm.
employees with disabilities, those at the intersections, right? Really talking about,
Yep.
hey, I see that you're making progress on your DEI goals, and guess what? There's still some barriers, and we want you to be aware of that. And that those groups are actually getting compensated for their lived experiences and the strategies that they're providing. So there's incentives, they're incentivizing it. And that is a big shift for some organizations where they're very happy that they have an employee resource group network, that they get information and feedback, but they're not being strategic about it. And again, I'm
Hmm.
just going to go back to that long-term vision. Like with anything else, if your company has a marketing campaign, that long-term vision of what those goals are. You probably are very clear on those milestones of like we're on track of reaching it, or we have to course correct. And I don't see this enough in this work. I see a lot of people investing in it, doing a lot of actions, but it's actions for the sake of actions and not actions for the sake of transformation. And I think the organizations that have BRG networks, I think they're getting closer to that. And I think they're actually putting these kind of ideas into action.
It's so interesting you mentioned the compensation because on our executive sponsor panel this morning, that topic came up.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is one company that was on the panel this morning definitely looking at that. So
Yeah.
yes. So we've got a question. So we recently heard from our good friend Ashley Brundage, which you of course know,
Yeah.
about how the terms inclusion and diversity turn off a certain percentage of your audience. Do you think that belonging is a better term, or do you have other terminology tips?
Yeah. I mean, I think if an audience is turned off by the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's a good sign of indicating where that organization might be at. So that's important information, number one, because I do think that we shouldn't get into the habit of euphemism. We should be able to name what we're seeing. So organizations that are further along on their journey, and this might be kind of challenging for some folks here, but naming traits of white supremacy culture or naming traits of how patriarchy works. I mean, that's for some organizations, they're ready for it. And if they hear those terms and they're turned off by the work, that's going to suggest that there needs to be more front end work to understand how our own biases work, and how what dominant culture is. And I do think the framework of belonging and also exclusion and the cost of feeling the sting of exclusion in the workplace. So feeling disconnected, disengaged. I mean, these are all metrics that HR often looks at, and good HR leaders take those metrics very seriously. This is an entry point. And I think the belonging framework, if you're in an organization where I said any of those terms and you're like, oh my gosh, if we talk about this in the workplace where there's a big risk and there's negative consequences, then I think the belonging framework can start. And I think Ashley's take on that is very, knowing that she has a background in the financial sector, which tends to run, in terms of this work, is maybe a couple of years behind in some of the other sectors. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right. Well, before we wrap up, I want to give you the opportunity to share any parting words, thoughts.
Yeah, I love that this event is happening. Thank you for making it happen and bringing so many amazing people across the state of Texas together. There's a lot of work to be done in this country, definitely in the state, and it's leaders like you all that are making that happen. And so I want to also acknowledge that these were big ideas, right? And so for some of us, it's like, I'm in this organization. I don't hold a lot of positional power. I like what you're saying. Just know that just getting started and finding a trusted colleague, no matter where they sit in the organization, to talk about these ideas so that you are kind of sharing what might be possible and just kind of taking some of those initial actions, even if it's just, you might want to read the book, Imagine Belonging or Belonging at Work, as a way of just kind of recognizing there are some everyday actions you can take that you don't have to be the CEO of your company to take them to make a difference. So everybody here has that opportunity. So I encourage you to keep going. And and I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to connect with you all. And yeah, thanks.
Well, Rhodes, I wanted to just have you elaborate just for a minute. Thinking about strategy and companies needing to bring in, thought leaders like you to help them move the culture forward, shift the culture. How do you work with companies typically? What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity. I widely consult with businesses, organizations, government agencies across sector. The consulting elements are doing a lot of that visioning work, a lot of planning, a lot of cascading these kind of goals throughout different departments in the organization to take a holistic approach that's super intersectional. So, if folks are interested in working with me and learning a little bit more about those offerings, I'm at rhodesperry.com. And in addition to doing that kind of high level done for you consulting, I'm also a huge on community building. So if you are someone who's an ERG leader, if you're a DEI practitioner, if you're someone in movement building, doing social justice work, we have a community called the Belonging at Work community, and we meet 2 times every month. And it's a space where we really grapple with some of the bigger challenges, right? That we wouldn't have time to talk through in 45 minutes here, but the things that really throw you sideways, or there's some curveballs that come your way, we work through them as a community of practitioners, and I love it. It gives me so much life. So that's another space that I'm very proud to just hold and facilitate. And the last thing, that if you like learning about this content and you want to be with folks that continue to push around what's possible, is that we have our Belonging at Work Summit every July. And it runs, this year it's running July 11th through the 15th. If you just go to belongingatworksummit.com, you can register for it, and it's 100% free. So we want to democratize this information because we feel like it's too important just to kind of keep within our field. So if you're interested in checking that out, please do so. And if you have colleagues that could benefit from learning about this, you're certainly welcome to join us.
Well, I want to add to that. So everybody, and Lisa's put it in the chat for us, everybody's going to get, again, a copy of Rhodes' new book, Imagine Belonging, and a long list of bonus materials. Rhodes, just throw out two or three of those bonus materials. What do we have in there?
Oh yeah, yeah. So tomorrow we're doing an inclusive leadership building team event. So if that's something, definitely check out that because it's a little time sensitive. You get a free month to the Belonging Network community. So if that sounded of interest to you, potentially one of your colleagues, you have access to that. You get an audio version of the book. That's coming out in April. Um, we have actually one of our book marketing people, Amber Kidd, is here, who is a fellow Texan. So
Yay,
she knows
Amber.
all of those bonuses as well. She helped us create them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we also are throwing in an ebook. So if you're someone who wants to take
Yeah.
this on the run, you've got a tablet of some sort, you can read the book that way. So again, we just want to make sure that the information is as accessible as possible and that you can benefit from it and apply it to your work.
It is a robust list of bonus materials, so I think everybody's going to be actually pleasantly surprised. And you're getting the link out. I know Lisa shared that this morning too. But of course, some of it is time sensitive, some of it is just static, and you'll be able to grab it whenever you want. But do pay attention to the follow-up emails that we'll be sending you. And we, of course, as part of our support of Rhodes for this event and his generosity for joining us today, we bought a bulk purchase of the books that you each, of course, are going to be receiving in the mail. You supplied your mailing address, but I want to encourage you. Please look at and reach out to Rhodes if you want to order bulk books of his new book for your ERG, BRG. Certainly, they can work with you on that as well, and then making sure that there's full access to bonus materials and just getting looped into everything that Rhodes is doing. This is Rhodes, you're the two P's. We heard it this morning. Your passion, your purpose. Thank you for sharing your gifts with the world. Thank you for all that you do for our community, and you truly do with your work make the world a better place. And we're just so grateful for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we're going to wind up the keynote here. We are going to be back shortly. We've got a break, and we're going to be back shortly at 1:30. Melissa will kick us off to introduce our speakers for our afternoon session, Pathway to Transition. This is presented by our good friends at EY. So go take a break, grab an afternoon snack, and then come back and see us at 1:30 and hear yet another great presentation for us to wind up the summit. Looking forward to seeing you then. Thank you.